Deploy, deploy, deploy. How do we get the right clean tech and climate tech investments actually out there, installed and delivered to the places and the people who need them the most? This is 8 Minutes, the podcast about the energy transition. It takes about 8 minutes for the sun's rays to hit Earth, or about the length of time that Liz Truss can remain as Prime Minister of the UK. Let's get it on. So today we're being joined by Molly Bauch, who is a good friend of mine from Accenture, who has lived and breathed this problem. Molly, thank you for joining us.
Paul, you are my brother from another mother, and I am delighted to be here.
Well, I am excited to get into it, to interview you and talk a little bit about what exactly is going to be, what's going to be necessary for us to take that next step and actually take all of this amazing investment that's come through the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, and really put that to work out there in the environment. So Molly, if you could go ahead and give our audience maybe a little bit of your background.
Yeah, I'd love that. And it is an exciting time, Paul. It's almost like I'm getting whiplash from the prior administration tamping down on all investments in climate change to like the more than sugar high we're getting with some really exciting climate bills that I know we're going to be talking about. I mean, it is a fundamentally different moment, and I am delighted to talk about all the things that we have got to do to take advantage of that moment, because it's not inevitable that we're going to move at the speed and urgency and scale we need. So really looking forward to this conversation. On me, I'm a former journalist. I've loved telling stories all my life. I actually teach a storytelling class at a local university, and I've always dug telling stories at the intersection of humanity and the environment, probably because I like just running around in the woods and playing in creeks and hiking mountains. But I shifted gears out of journalism in 2011 when I was in grad school. I was studying to become the next Christian Amanpour and go and travel the world and be on the front line of what was happening when a plane smashed into the Pentagon and shattered everything. The world turned upside down, and 9/11 seemed much more pressing a threat than climate. And so I dropped my journalism ambitions and raced off to go play a Beltway bandit, or in DC terms, a consultant around the Beltway. And I got lost in the national security woods for more than a decade with 3-letter agencies and underground basements, trying to help our boys and girls in the intelligence community and other national security agencies try to go and fight the good fight. But I had a steadily sinking feeling that I wasn't in the right space and place to try to move the needle on some of our most pressing climate challenges. I'm from Louisiana. We lose a football field of land every hour to coastal erosion. We've lost the equivalent of Delaware since the 1940s. And I am from a place, Paul, called Cancer Alley between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, where you just drive down the mighty Mississippi and you see just orange and purple hues all night long from all the petrochemical refineries. So I always had this urgency with climate, and I put it on pause after 9/11. But a decade went by in my professional career, and I realized I had moved too far away from the mission. And so I was trying to get back to that when I landed at the current company I'm at now. And I work in energy transition every day with an incredible cast of characters, from utilities to energy to public service, boys and girls, trying to fundamentally rewire America and reshape our physical economy to get to net zero.
So Molly's being very humble there in terms of where she's from and what she does today with Accenture. She leads the energy transition services team there at the big consultancy, really focused on the biggest problems that our utilities, that our infrastructure, and that our big corporate clients have out there in the world today. So Molly, thank you for taking on this big challenge, but thank you very much for spending some time today to talk about how we can actually deploy some of this capital and some of this technology out there into the real world.
Oh, you bet, friend. Stoked to do so.
So Molly, in addition to working in this field, you also walk the talk and you live it. in your own personal life as well. As I understand it, you've gone through the efforts of installing and taking this climate tech and putting it to work at your own home. Can you give us a little bit of background as to how you came about that and some of the different stories or motivations that evolved from that?
Paul, how much time you got? Because I don't know if we're going to fit it into a podcast. There have been a lot of sharp sticks in the eye along the way. It's not been easy or obvious at times. I'm still bullish, so there's light at the end of this tunnel, but the tunnel has been dark and winding. The first climate investment, if you will, I made, just to talk tactical, practical, was my wheels. I got an EV in 2016, a Chevy Volt, which was an awesome hybrid. You could plug it in, you could put gas in it, and the gas fed an electric engine. It was a cool piece of tech. And I was waiting in line for my Tesla Model 3 for years while I was tooling around. And I thought the Chevy Volt would give me kind of a safety blanket while I figured out what the heck this new charging infrastructure world looked like. And so getting an EV was a bit comical. I had a ton of car dealers try to talk me out of EVs, or who didn't know what EVs were, or couldn't answer simple questions about batteries and where to charge. And so I wound up getting the Volt after a ton of just gumshoe legwork and a lot of questions and answers and personal exploration, investigation. And then I drove it with reckless abandon for a couple of years while waiting on the Model 3. And it was often as pleasant as getting lost in the woods with a broken leg when I was trying to charge away from home, because you just have this stack of RFID cards, this loads of apps on your phone. And every time you wended your way down into a parking garage, your app was outdated. And because you were 3 levels down, you couldn't get the next, updated version, and you couldn't dig in your purse fast enough to get the right RFID card, or the charger was out of whack. So there was that. I learned a lot. I learned you charge at home effectively until the charging infrastructure comes online. And then when I finally got a single family home and I had my Tesla Model 3, the first thing I did was install solar. And it was an awesome lesson in can do DIY, dumb as rocks, hard way, because I installed my solar. I thought I was hot to trot because I had done some volunteer solar installations with an incredible organization called Grid Alternatives, and I'd learned how to do array layouts and slap glass. And I thought, what could go wrong? How hard could this be? I'll do it in my own home. Walk the talk. And so I only did that, Paul, after calling 5 installers to see if they could do it for me, and I could employ local boys and girls. And each told me I'd be spending, $40K or more. And I didn't, after getting a brand new house, want to spend that much extra cash out of pocket. So DIY I did, and I hired some installer friends, and off we went to go and get this project done. And I project managed the whole thing, and the wrong template was used for the rooftop capacity, and no one caught it. The engineer didn't catch it. The city didn't catch it. The electrician didn't catch it. So my inverter melted once they put 10 kilowatts of solar on top of my roof, they being me as well. I was dangling on the roof with a harness. And then my solar buddies couldn't get it back online. And then the inverter company wouldn't let me troubleshoot because I wasn't a formal company. And then I got it back online, and squirrels attacked and took $2,000 worth of panels offline. And then I had occasional software, meltdowns. So other than that, it's been seamless and totally flawless. But I do have a 10 kilowatt solar panel, and I got permission from the utility to allow me to, quote, overbuild for my footprint, because I knew I was going all electric. I was all in. I was absolutely going to rewire my house and rip out all the gas. And so after solar, next up was getting a heat pump and an induction stove and an electric water heater. When I moved in, I had bought an electric dryer, so I already had that. So I basically got an all electric house but for my gas fireplace, which I can't quite get rid of because it's just cozy, and I haven't found an electrical equivalent. But that too was a bit of a twisting road, because I had 3 electricians try to talk me out of heat pumps and tell me gas was better. I had to upgrade my panel, and getting lots of different quotes with electricians. They had very, very varying perspectives on heat pumps and the value thereof. When I finally installed the heat pump, the guys installed it with the wrong wire gauges. And thank God I had an electrician catch them before they left. So they had to rip all that out and redo it. And then when they did install it, they misinstalled it. So I had a couple $100 heat bill the first couple of months, which was not awesome because I was so excited about it. And then with my induction stove, the guys wound up delivering it while I was upstairs on a call, and they slipped it in my house without a power cord, because apparently, Paul, you have to ask for a power cord as an extra add-on when you buy a stove. And I don't buy stoves often, so I didn't know that. And then I spent $1,200 in new pots and pans for only 9 pans. I had to get rid of my 35 beautiful pots and pans that I love to cook. I'm from the South, and Cajun cooking is my forte. I had to get rid of about 35 pots and pans for a total of 9 induction ready pots and pans. So I'd say that I get it. I know where the friction is. I know where the experience isn't awesome. And I'm happy to talk to you about what we can do to make all that better.
So Molly, an amazing story. And I feel like we're, if we haven't lost our audience to the dark side of sitting there saying this is too complicated and too difficult to even start with, I'm a little worried about what the future might hold. This doesn't seem to be a very easy road. Can I ask a couple questions about
Please
your
do.
own experience? All right. When did you install your solar onto your house?
2019, May of 2019.
All right, because today there are a number of different developers and installers, all of which are capable and able to get these solar panels installed, and yet you weren't able to find the same type of assistance back in that time frame, huh?
I found them. The price point didn't seem like it was a compelling proposition. It didn't seem like the juice was worth the squeeze when I knew how to install it, and I knew I could still get. It was still the 30% tax credit, right? So I was absolutely going to take advantage of that. And I felt like some of the boys and girls I was talking to didn't know as much about solar as I did. And that's a function maybe of a salesperson being different than an installer or a developer. But call it dumb hubris, Paul. Maybe I should have gone with a solar developer, because you're right. There are a lot of. I feel that we have always been on the solar coaster, and I hope we get to talk about the IRA and why a decade of stability is really going to level that out and just really supercharge our industry here, which is so exciting. But I think that you're right in that past is not prologue, and we've got a different cast of characters today that are ready, willing, and able to give you excellent service and an amazing product.
Well, so let's turn the questions around then. All right. And given the experience that you've had and some of the different pitfalls and challenges and obstacles you've had to overcome to get to this point of having an electrified house and as close to a net zero house as you possibly can, with the exception of your fireplace.
I wouldn't cheat.
Not everyone is going to have that same technical capability, the same resources, the same knowledge of the space that you bring to bear, right? So what are some of the lessons that you feel you learned that are going to be applicable as others go out there and try to take on this challenge? If I can, all right, there are not a lot of net zero homes out there in the marketplace right now, all right?
Brother, there are not. And what Paul didn't tell you is that he's the guy I call when I have questions about how to deploy this. Paul has been a guru and a mentor, and he's one of the smartest cats out there. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know that, and you think the same thing. And Paul, I found myself often in rooms thinking about designing new products and programs with a bunch of folks who were willing and eager, but hadn't walked the sometimes rocky path, and few, if any, had EVs. Almost none had solar. Induction stoves weren't really a thing 5 years ago that folks talked about with anything more than just idle curiosity. And so having the perspective of having gone through the acquisition of each of those pieces parts individually, because my friend, none of it was bundled. There was no easy button. There wasn't, oh, well, if you've got solar, you might also think about a heat pump, or here's an electric water heater. I'd love to bundle that for you, baby. And here's a financing package. That's not a thing, or at least it hadn't been a thing. And so if your question is, what do we have to do to lower the evangelical, barrier that is required to put yourself through this, we've got to make adoption of climate tech easy, obvious, affordable, desirable, and available. And you could pull each of those levers separately. It's got to be intuitive. People want one front door, but if they walk in one front door, they can rarely afford more than two things. They probably don't even know the six things that you can do in your individual house if you have a single family house. So we need a lot of education, and we need a lot of better experience, product availability. And then the boys and girls who are deploying this, we got to aggregate this stuff and make it stupid simple for them to get on the bandwagon. I mean, more than 80% of home improvement contractors are mom and pop small businesses, and they do not have the time to go get wicked smart about all this new tech and or get the certifications required to install these high SEER pieces of equipment, high efficiency pieces of equipment. And so we got to make it easy, not just for the customers, but the boys and girls who are going to install this, because you can't virtualize the installation of a ton of this tech. It's people walking into your house and having that engagement with you.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And it has been a struggle. CNBC back in 2019 did a survey of the American households and found that only 5,000 net zero houses existed within the United States. And
5,001. 5,001.
There you go. And by the time 2021 came around, it's gone up to 28,000 homes. But when you think about a building stock of 142 million homes in the United States, it is a small percentage. We need to make it easier and more accessible, which actually, if you don't mind my taking the interview in this direction, raises a question about is net zero and deployment of this technology available to only those with the resources to afford it? Or what do you think, and what are your thoughts around the equity discussion about making this affordable for everyone?
Yeah, it certainly has been, hasn't it? Let's be honest. I am in climate tech. I am absolutely committed. It is my life's work to go and move the needle on emissions reduction so that we can be healthier and wealthier. I mean, and it has been, as any material change, we're talking about rewiring our physical economy. You don't just snap solutions off the shelf and scale them magically. We don't have the tools to deploy at scale, the producers, the manufacturers. And so it takes time. And so that pointy edge of the spear has been super expensive to go and get an EV. That price point is precipitously coming down, and we're going to see price parity with electric vehicles in the next year for light duty vehicles. And that is incredible. That's staggeringly wonderful and outstanding news. And then for equity, we've long had things like LIHEAP and energy efficiency, and that's just been unsexy. But it's a get in the game condition if you want to get net zero. You got to insulate your envelope. You got to stop leakage. Just happening, all over our building stock. So there is more and more investment available now that's going to materially move the needle on that equity piece than has ever been available before. From a workforce development perspective, just equity of access to skilling, and then the jobs, and then from availability of credits. What's awesome about the IRA is that they have all these, what they call adders, that value stack additional subsidization for EVs, for energy efficiency, for retrofitting your home. And you can income qualify for those pieces parts, but it won't be easy or obvious. Just because they build it doesn't mean they're going to come we got to make accessing these adders, bundling them together, exposing them to customers, and then talking in weekend language to these boys and girls who would need and benefit most from these climate tech pieces parts, whether or not that's a heat pump, an EV, or just a sealed house with a better energy efficiency rating. We got to make that obvious. So the folks who are deploying this stuff have got to be smart about how to deploy it, how to bundle it, how to present it too.
Yeah. So these are really good points, and it actually segues nicely into the next series of questions that I was going to ask Molly, which, as you talk about the EV prices coming down, let me even back up a little bit further and talking about the investment from the IRA and the investment from the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. What has really driven a lot of the enthusiasm in our sustainability, climate, and green energy world, if you will, has been this increase of investment that's going to continue to drive the price points down, make it easier for adoption, and eventually get to some of those points of parity that you mentioned with the EVs, et cetera, down the line, right? We've already seen it with solar. Solar has dropped significantly over the course of the last few years. Yep. And by few, I would probably mean the last decade or so. Yep. It was originally up at around $130 per megawatt hour. Today, it's down closer to $20 a megawatt hour, and very, very competitive, if not more competitive than any sort of new fossil fuel generation that's coming in place. And the hope is that expanding these tax credits and some of these incentives to electric vehicles, we can start to drive down the cost for those as well. That said, electric vehicles are still very, very expensive. And even despite some of the incentives that are given to lower income in the IRA, incentives that are given to lower income individuals who want to go out and purchase an electric vehicle, do you think that there is enough of an incentive there to materially shift the electric vehicle market to the point where it is not simply a toy for the wealthy, but can encompass and be a point of parity for people who may not be able to afford a $55,000 car all the time?
So I think a couple of things are happening at once. I won't parse words. Yes, I think the IRA is a game changer, but moreover, so do the automakers. And so it's interesting that I think it's going to be a game changer. It's relevant when GM says it's going to have 100% electric fleet, or Toyota, all of your top 15 major automakers have made commitments to have all electric lines, or just fundamentally go all electric. And if it wasn't the end of a 13-hour day, I'd reel off more of them. But the point is that availability of these things is going to be market moving. You've also got in the bipartisan infrastructure legislation that you mentioned, and that's the $1.2 trillion package of energy and classic road and bridge infrastructure that was passed last November. You see $5 billion in what's called a National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. And this thing is going to supercharge fast charging. We got 500,000 chargers that are going to be funded by the NEVI investment over the next handful of years. And that cash has already started to flow, and it's not competitive. So every state, if they submitted a plan for this, and every state and 2 territories did, we'll start to see funds the back half of this year rolling. And then there's an expectation that we're going to have more and more infrastructure ever by an order of magnitude in short order. But that's one, is that you got to have the infrastructure there so that folks feel comfortable getting the cars. And so much about NEVI was about the equity piece, where we're placing that infrastructure. So it's not just away from or in urban cities. It has a rural component for folks who otherwise wouldn't be able to access it, and or we're considering disadvantaged community locations and making sure they have charging infrastructure as well. But the second piece is that we're fundamentally rethinking the form factor of transportation as folks are moving back to the urban core, and we're trying to electrify public transit. You get a flight away from public transit during COVID, and that's for obvious reasons. But folks they're struggling to come back. We need to change that paradigm because we cannot have every single boy and girl in this country get a car. That is a non-viable solution. And the more and more that we've got public transit that is absolutely turnkey, simple, from point to point, and last mile solutions as well. Get on a scooter, get on a bike. The more we're going to have equitable access to net zero transportation, and it won't just have to be in a private light duty vehicle. So we need to do a lot more work, and cities are stepping up. They've been extraordinary, thinking about how to reconfigure their public transit, and we need to do more of that.
Now, so great points all along. All right. And so as we think about EVs and kind of this maturity curve that electric vehicles are going through in terms of the reduction in the price and the better quality, the longer range, the better infrastructure that is a byproduct of both of these pieces of legislation. As we think about solar and how we talked about how the maturity there, to go back to some of your own experiences and what it looked like even just 3 years ago in terms of installing solar versus today, it does feel like these technologies are starting to mature to the point where there's a viable market out there. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that, because there's always been a viable market. What's happening is that it's becoming more mainstream to the point where more people can access these types of technologies. Do you think that we've got a technology stack that is mature enough as it stands today, or do we still have some space to go around things such as batteries or heat pumps or other aspects of the energy transition?
So behind the meter batteries, home batteries, or batteries in commercial facilities are game changing. So if EVs are the on-ramp to deep decarbonization, your storage is where you really, cement gains and you tip the scales. I don't think that we have a one front door or an easy button for deploying storage solutions. You might have noticed a conspicuously absent piece of technology in my house, and that was batteries. And I haven't found two things yet that give me the right comfort. And I think I think if I kick the tires on this, I might find it. I just haven't gone back to the well to look lately, Paul. And that is a home energy management system that can connect all my devices and make them talk to each other and load level when I need a load level. So I got a 10 kilowatt solar panel, and that feeds my car, that feeds all of my electric load, but not equally. And so how do I get a smart device that knows when the sun's shining and when it's not shining, and helps me set and forget certain controls, and then use my battery to make the balance of systems all come together and have a really net zero experience, right? So I don't have a net zero automated house. I have a close to net zero manual house because I do the work. I look when the sun is shining and I plug things in, and I unplug things when it's raining, right?
Well, as we talk about the maturity of technologies, then, that is an area that is also getting a lot of investment, primarily from the private sector. And you're starting to see companies such as Span or Itron or others moving into that space to try to solve exactly that type of problem. So hopefully over the course of the next few years, we can start to see some of those home management systems really mature and evolve as well.
And can we talk about GM?
Please.
I mean, game changing. So GM just launched it became an energy company. It's no longer just an automaker. And they've got this energy division that is providing hardware and software. And they have a cloud platform that does the things that we just talked about, controlling all the pieces, parts, which now include not just your electric vehicle, but also your solar. They just minted a deal with SunPower to be their exclusive provider. They've got battery options. So you go to one place, you poke one belly button, you walk through one door, and there is just the range of products and services plus financing to get your solar plus storage plus your EV charging infrastructure. And I just absolutely love creative business models, Paul, like GM is flirting with, that help you pay for these assets, because we can casually talk about, well, are people ready to buy this? But the dirty little secret is it is orders of magnitude more expensive than anything we've funded before. And how are we going to pay for all this infrastructure? Front of the meter for all the massive grid modernizations, behind the meter to deploy those billions of machines. The IRA is a game changer, but models like GM and the one that they're flirting with will allow you to take the energy out of your car battery and send it back to the grid for some kind of remuneration. And what they're flirting with is the ability to take a payment by me giving the grid permission to pull some energy away from my car. Then I can pay down my car loan, right? Not just financial remuneration or just net metering like solar, where your bill just racks back and forth depending on whether or not you're producing or consuming energy. But it actually has a financial instrument that can pay down a debt on a car loan. That's extraordinary. Can you imagine that being a scaled model where we start to deploy infrastructure as grid assets that pay for themselves? Right? It's only in pilot phase, and the heart of your question was: is it ready to be deployed? Do we have something at scale? And I think we have emerging things that are very, very interesting that need to be scaled, but we're not there yet.
To your point, though, getting the right processes in place, the right business models in place, the right financing in place, it is necessary to really take this to the next stage, right? Whether that is General Motors and their new GM Energy division, and playing with this vehicle to house and vehicle to grid type of concept that frankly has also been piloted at the electric school bus level and
exactly
at, many of these different things, right? Or whether it's with decarbonization as a service or energy as a service, and some of those financing models that, to your point, help you to pay down the actual cost of the asset itself based off of the savings that you generate from lower cost electricity, lower cost renewable power, however it might be. In many ways, one could argue that the advent of the personal power purchase agreement, the PPA, enabled solar to reach a more mass market because it made it more affordable, because people didn't have to put up the costs, the initial capital costs themselves, right? And so those types of new financing models that are starting to come out, the advent of green banks and the access that individuals have to loans and capital and de-risked capital is really important. I think what we're going to see here, and this is my own personal opinion, I would love your perspective on this, Molly Bauch, is the amount of money that we're talking about through the IRA and through the BIL is significant, but it's a small portion of what it's enabling in the private market to lever up onto it. And so what we're going to really see is this really big, massive influx of capital into the space. I was actually at a conference this morning talking about corporate venture capital, and they said the two areas that they are still planning on investing in here for the better part of 2022, as we grapple with a global economic slowdown, they're still investing in climate tech. They're still investing in frontier tech. Private capital is there. Federal capital is there. It seems like getting those processes to talk to each other and to be able to facilitate that deployment is a key part of what we're talking about today.
I think the trends was giving a talk last week, and if I recall this correctly, global financial investment, so private investment, banks, financial institutions have put 1.2 trillion into clean energy transition in 2022 thus far. And we are set to get to 2 trillion in the next year per year. It's a meteoric rise. And we're going to need, what's crazy, Paul, is we're going to need way more than that to achieve our ultimate ambitions. But to your point, the federal role in supercharging and juicing the system with the BIL and then the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, 1.2 trillion and 370 billion in investment, I think sets market signals, and it gives confidence and assurance to private actors that there is not going to be another solar coaster, even in the midst of a recession, because we are re-upping our tax credits, production tax credits, investment tax credits. We're stabilizing them. And the IRA is a decade of stabilization, right? And that is awesome. That is an awesome power. And we're going to need it, because just to step back and talk about what we're talking about when we say net zero, we are going to have to triple the amount of electric capacity than what we have today to make all of the renewables flow that we need to stay under 1.5 degrees of Celsius warming that we committed to in Paris. That's millions of miles, double our transmission. So the big pipes that wheel power from generation to use, and then distribution that bring it to the end point. We're going to have to double the amount of transmission lines. It's just millions. We're going to have to at least triple the amount of distribution lines. And on the demand side, what we're talking about, we're going to need electrified 250 vehicles, 140 million households, 6 million trucks, all of our manufacturing and industrial processes. And the IRA and the IIJA are awesome instruments to move in that direction, but private market has got to pick up the rest of it. And I'm hopeful that this, two-part dance, one is the forceful signal that, private market should have confidence, stepping out and accelerating what we've been doing, because we're going to need to hit the go button a lot faster than we're.
And to that point, and just to bring it back to the theme of today's podcast around deploy. How do we take this investment and actually put it out into the marketplace? The Washington Post quoted Jigar Shah, who is the head of the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office, and probably the individual who has the greatest influence in terms of how much of this money is going to be distributed. I believe at the last count, the Loan Program Office had somewhere on the order of $100 billion that they were going to be facilitating because of these different pieces of legislation. Jigar said, and I'll quote, "There was this mistaken notion that if we just did more R&D and pursue more innovation, that the technologies will reach some sort of price reduction and be cheaper than the alternative. And I think what we've learned today is that the only way to reduce prices is to deploy. And then through the learning curve and incremental innovations, you get those price reductions." So, Molly, what are your thoughts?
It's not, I don't think necessary tension over deployment over innovation. I guess it is if you're taking your whole budget and saying what percent should be what innovation versus deployment. But we have got to get this stuff out there. I think there is innovation around the experience. I think it's around what the new business model looks like. Who are the actors that need to engage with you? I mean, the world turned upside down, Paul, when my automaker sold me electricity. What? And that's crazy. Or when my car battery can pay down my car loan, that's nuts. It's thinking about your assets as a prosumer in a very different way. And so I think when you think about innovation versus deployment, it comes back down to, should we bank everything we've got and every penny in direct air capture and green hydrogen? No, we absolutely have to invest in those, but in proportion and in balance. We got to just focus on the brass tacks of the fact that I literally don't have enough skilled workers on the grid side. So think big poles and wires. It takes 5 years to train a recloser technician, and we are approaching a 1 million person FTE shortage, a personnel shortage to maintain our grid, for Pete's sake. That's pretty fundamental. And then you cannot outsource solar installation. So fundamentally, there's a lot of tactical, practical things that we've got to do to deploy. We've got to train the workforce, both on the grid side for those millions of miles of transmission and distribution I talked about, for deploying billions of machines in homes and commercial buildings, electrifying and energizing sites for chargers, but then maintaining the chargers. It's not just electricians, it's technicians. It's a whole range of skills. We've got to think about how we train those folks, how we aggregate demand to make it simple for the contractor classes to go and do these jobs. So it's not just maybe they do 6 heat pumps a year for the willing and the interested to pull down IRA credits, but no, how do we have someone find all of these houses, target them, and proactively do the lead generation to bring this work to these contractors so we can deploy it? right? We've just got to get smarter. And as you said, Paul, there's so many processes that are complicated that we've got to simplify. It's the complex billing. It's the different front doors. It's the fact that I've got to call 3 different electricians and get 3 different quotes for 6 different pieces of technology in my house, right? There's no simplified marketer or storefront that does that for me now, but there will be, right? And we've got to get more of that on the ground. And so I do think it is about deploying. We can be innovative about how we deploy it. And a lot of it, candidly, is about bringing together actors that have never historically danced together, right? We've never had a car company also be the fuel provider. We've never had this amount of workforce development dollars at state levels, and they're thinking in very different ways about how to establish partnerships with community colleges, academia, incumbent training to go and make sure they're deploying dollars and know where the skills puck is going. And so we got to think about how to steward and get these monies out in a way that's really going to materially move the needle. And I think that's experience. I think that's new business models. And I think it's a lot of trained boys and girls on the ground making this stuff, turning wrenches and making this stuff happen.
Yeah. And then to piggyback on Jigger's quote and what you were just saying there, as we deploy, as we get this technology out there and the investment actually into projects and into development, we're going to have those micro innovations that make things more efficient, make them easier, that are going to bring those business models to bear, take some business models and maybe sit there and say, these are not working, right? But there are going to be others that are going to evolve, some that have not even been discussed yet, that are going to bubble up, if you will, and really start to make some of this deployment easier, both at the individual level, at the corporate level, and eventually at the grid level, all of which need to work in tandem.
I'm very, very keen to see where the as a service goes, Paul, right? Where we can sign up and I'm handling the product recommendations or selection, installation, and financing, and all the back end billing in as few steps as possible and as intuitive as possible. We need more of that.
Yep. Well, you certainly won't find any disagreement from me concerning the fact that NeoVista does the decarbonization as a service for our commercial clients. But we're right there at the front edge of trying to figure out what those business models and micro innovations, if you will, are needed. The technology exists. The financing now exists. The commitment exists. How do we pull all those things together to actually change how people consume and use electricity? Molly, fantastic chatting with you today. All right. Very, very pleased that you were able to take the time to talk energy transition with us. Molly Bauch, our lead expert on energy transition from Accenture. Appreciate it. And I do hope for those who are tuning in today, we are recording this on November 1st, the day after Halloween. And despite all of the horror stories that Molly started this particular podcast with, there is enthusiasm, there is hope, there is a path forward for us to overcome those obstacles and barriers. There are business models and financing that are evolving to help us overcome those. There is a path towards net zero.
Heck yeah, there is, man. And I cannot wait to go down it further, faster with you. Thanks for the time, friend. This was awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you, Molly.